And the taxi driver said, "Hey, man, don't go in there. They got big dogs over there. Don't go over that wall." I said, "Well, when's the opportunity going to come again?" I jumped over the wall.
Bruce Springsteen, known for his integrity and reserved demeanor, shocked the music world today. Breaking his usual silence on industry feuds, he spoke openly and critically about Van Morrison. The unexpected statement sent ripples through fans and musicians alike, not just because of what Springsteen said, but because of who he aimed it at. Van Morrison, a man revered as a musical genius and notorious for his combative personality. Springsteen's critique reignited a long-standing tension between the two legends. Van Morrison himself has publicly expressed frustration with Springsteen in the past, citing what he perceives as a lack of authenticity in Springsteen's politically charged work. This back and forth has transformed their relationship into one of the most debated rivalries in modern music. Why would a figure as respected as Springsteen publicly criticize a fellow musical legend? And what does it reveal about Van Morrison's complex legacy? To understand this, we need to go back to the beginning, to the streets of post-war Belfast, where a young Van Morrison first found his voice. Van Morrison was born into the gritty working-class environment of Belfast in 1945. His childhood was steeped in music thanks to his father's extensive collection of American jazz and blues records. Icons like Lead Belly, Ray Charles, and Muddy Waters provided the soundtrack to Morrison's early years, sparking a passion for music that would later define his life. By his teenage years, he was already playing gigs around Belfast, honing his skills in a city where opportunities were scarce and competition was fierce. In the early 1960s, Morrison formed Them, a band that would become a cornerstone of his career. Their rise to fame was fueled by hits like Gloria, a song that remains a rock anthem to this day. Morrison's raw, powerful voice and commanding stage presence set the group apart. But behind the scenes, the band was far from harmonious. Morrison's strong-willed nature often clashed with his bandmates, leading to heated arguments over creative direction, song arrangements, and touring schedules. While the rest of the band wanted to ride the wave of commercial success, Morrison was more focused on artistic integrity, a trait that would define his career but alienate those around him. Even at this early stage, Morrison's uncompromising approach hinted at the tensions that would later draw criticism from figures like Bruce Springsteen. His insistence on control and vision foreshadowed the complexities that would make him a polarizing figure in the music industry. Eventually, the tensions became unbearable, and Morrison left Them to pursue a solo career. It was a bold move, one that came with significant risks, but his gamble paid off. In 1968, he released Astral Weeks, an album now hailed as one of the greatest of all time. Its fusion of folk, jazz, and blues was groundbreaking, yet its brilliance came at a personal cost. Morrison was battling the pressures of fame, and his uncompromising vision often left him isolated from collaborators and fans alike. By the late 1960s, Van Morrison stood at the pinnacle of creative success. Astral Weeks had cemented his place in music history, with critics praising its emotional depth and innovative sound. But for Morrison, the acclaim was a double-edged sword. While the world celebrated his genius, he recoiled from the attention that came with it. Unlike his contemporaries who embraced fame, Morrison rejected it entirely. His disdain for the public eye became legendary. Journalists who managed to secure interviews often left frustrated. His answers were curt, evasive, or laced with sarcasm. Promoters dreaded working with him, never knowing if he would show up for gigs or walk off stage mid-performance. This unpredictability became a hallmark of Morrison's career, earning him a reputation as one of the most difficult figures in the music industry. This very behavior, described by Springsteen as emblematic of Morrison's difficult personality, contributed to his complex legacy. For Springsteen, who built his career on reliability and connection with fans, Morrison's erratic approach stood in stark contrast, amplifying the impact of his criticism. Morrison's discomfort with fame wasn't mere stubbornness. It was deeply rooted in his personality. He was an artist who thrived in solitude, channeling his emotions into music rather than public appearances. Songs like Into the Mystic and Moon Dance resonated with listeners precisely because they were raw and unfiltered, a window into Morrison's soul. Yet, for those who knew him personally, this emotional depth was rarely visible. Friends and colleagues often described him as distant, moody, and impossible to predict. His aversion to the spotlight wasn't limited to his professional interactions. Morrison often refused to engage in the trappings of celebrity culture. While other stars attended lavish parties and courted the media, Morrison retreated further into his music, creating an air of mystery that only fueled public fascination. However, this reclusiveness came at a cost. It alienated fans, collaborators, and even family members, leaving Morrison isolated despite his immense success. The dichotomy between Morrison's public and private personas became a defining feature of his legacy. While his audience connected deeply with the vulnerability in his music, those closest to him experienced the sharp edges of his personality. For Morrison, fame wasn't a dream come true. It was a cage, one he would spend his entire career trying to escape. Springsteen's remarks brought this tension to the forefront, highlighting how Morrison's rejection of fame and contentious personality continue to shape his legacy in ways both inspiring and divisive. Van Morrison's complex personality wasn't limited to his professional life. It spilled over into his personal relationships. His first marriage to Janet Rigsby began with promise but ended in acrimony. Friends close to the couple described their relationship as turbulent, with Morrison's erratic behavior and emotional distance creating a chasm that became impossible to bridge. The couple's divorce was a bitter affair, emblematic of the struggles that would characterize many of Morrison's personal connections. Morrison's relationship with his daughter, Shayna, followed a similar pattern. While he supported her musical career, helping her navigate the industry, their bond remained strained. Friends of the family noted that Morrison's emotional guardedness often made it difficult for those closest to him to connect with him on a deeper level. Unlike many of his contemporaries who embraced family life, Morrison seemed to find solace in solitude, channeling his emotions into his art rather than his relationships. Yet it is precisely this emotional turmoil that fueled some of Morrison's most memorable songs. Tracks like Crazy Love and Tupelo Honey resonated with fans because of their raw, unfiltered portrayal of love and longing. For listeners, these songs felt like windows into Morrison's soul, offering glimpses of vulnerability that were rarely visible in his interactions with others. However, for those within his inner circle, this vulnerability often felt out of reach, creating a dichotomy that defined Morrison's personal and professional lives. Morrison's ability to turn personal pain into universally relatable music became one of his defining traits, but it also underscored the paradox of his life. A man whose art connected with millions, but who often struggled to connect with those closest to him. Despite their shared status as music legends, Bruce Springsteen and Van Morrison couldn't be more different. Springsteen is known for his deep connection with fans, grounded in authenticity and a relentless work ethic. Morrison, on the other hand, has often been described as aloof and fiercely independent, prioritizing artistic integrity over public approval. These contrasting approaches to fame and artistry have long set the stage for tension between the two. Springsteen's recent remarks about Morrison are not the first instance of friction between the two artists. Morrison has previously criticized Springsteen for what he perceived as overblown political posturing in his music, dismissing it as insincere. For Springsteen, Morrison's behavior during the COVID-19 pandemic, including his outspoken protests against lockdowns and government mandates, may have been the final straw. Springsteen's critique was not just about Morrison's actions, but also about the broader implications of using one's platform irresponsibly. The public nature of this feud has reignited debates within the music industry. Fans and critics alike have weighed in on the conflict, with some siding with Springsteen's call for accountability and others defending Morrison's right to express his views, no matter how controversial. This back and forth has not only highlighted the stark differences between the two, but also underscored the complex nature of fame and artistic responsibility. For Springsteen, who has built a career on themes of resilience, community, and shared humanity, Morrison's erratic and often confrontational persona represents a stark contrast. While Springsteen's performances are celebrations of unity, Morrison's are often introspective, even confrontational, challenging his audience to grapple with the raw emotions in his music. This philosophical divide has fueled their conflict and made their interactions a fascinating study in contrasts. In many ways, the Springsteen-Morrison dynamic reflects broader tensions within the music world. The balance between artistic freedom and public accountability, and the question of how much an artist owes to their audience. As fans continue to dissect this clash of titans, it becomes clear that their differences are not just personal, they represent two distinct approaches to what it means to be an artist. Van Morrison's reputation for being difficult wasn't just limited to his interactions with fans and family, it extended to his peers in the music industry. Over the decades, Morrison found himself embroiled in numerous feuds with fellow artists, promoters, and even political figures. One of the most publicized examples was his clash with Northern Ireland's health minister, Robin Swan, during the COVID-19 pandemic. While many artists use their platforms to promote public safety measures, Morrison took a starkly different stance, releasing a series of protest songs that criticized government mandates. The backlash was immediate and severe. Swan went so far as to file a defamation lawsuit against Morrison, accusing him of spreading harmful rhetoric. For many, this controversy epitomized the contradictions that defined Morrison's career. A man who fiercely championed personal freedom, yet often found himself at odds with societal norms. Morrison's conflicts weren't limited to political figures. He also clashed with numerous fellow artists, including Bob Geldof, Bono, and even longtime collaborator Eric Clapton. Clapton, who worked closely with Morrison on several projects, once described him as brilliant but unpredictable, a sentiment echoed by many who have worked with him. For Morrison, these conflicts weren't just professional disagreements. They were extensions of his uncompromising nature. Springsteen's recent remarks added another layer to this legacy of conflict. By criticizing Morrison publicly, Springsteen highlighted the growing divide between Morrison's artistry and his contentious personality. For fans, this tension has become an integral part of Morrison's appeal, a reminder that brilliance often comes at a cost. For all his controversies and conflicts, Van Morrison's influence on music is undeniable. Over a career spanning more than 40 albums, he has blended blues, jazz, folk, and rock in ways that have inspired countless artists, from Bruce Springsteen to Ed Sheeran. Yet his legacy remains a paradox, a man whose music brings people together, but whose personality often pushes them apart. Morrison's songs are often tender and deeply emotional, evoking longing and connection. Tracks like Have I Told You Lately and Brown Eyed Girl are celebrated worldwide for their warmth and relatability. However, the man behind those melodies remains elusive. Colleagues describe him as aloof, even abrasive, while fans grapple with the contradictions between his heartfelt lyrics and his public persona. Springsteen's criticism wasn't just about Morrison's recent controversies, it touched on a broader issue: the tension between Morrison's artistry and his personality. For Springsteen, who values consistency and emotional connection with his audience, Morrison's erratic nature stood in stark contrast, amplifying the complexity of his legacy. Yet, it's precisely these contradictions that make Morrison so fascinating. His life and career are like his music, rich, layered, and impossible to categorize. Just as his songs often end with unresolved chords, leaving listeners yearning for more, Morrison's story is one of jagged edges and unanswered questions. Van Morrison's story defies simplification. He is a man who gave the world masterpieces but demanded little in return other than his fiercely guarded autonomy. His brilliance is rivaled only by his complexity, a reminder that great art often comes from troubled souls. As Bruce Springsteen's remarks reignite debates about Morrison's enigmatic persona, one thing remains clear: Morrison's legacy is as profound as it is polarizing. He will forever be celebrated as a pioneer of music, a symbol of artistic independence, and an enigma who left an indelible mark on the world.